Explain like I'm 5 what's so complex about USB-C that we couldn't have had this technology 20 years ago. USB-C is just the connector shape, which is reversible unlike all those other USB variants A, B, Mini, Micro. But the biggest improvements to USB have been the transition from USB 2.0 to 3.0 and now up to 3.2. It can transfer a metric fuckton of data like 2 monitors worth of data while rapidly charging your device at up to 100 W. It's so impressive compared to where we used to be with computers. Not really a huge need for it at the time. 20 years ago, the industry hadn't yet even remotely agreed to the idea of a universal mobile device power connector. Digital video still wasn't a common trend, and high-speed peripheral data connections weren't common for everyday consumer use. Realistically, it could have existed for some applications 20 years ago. Making something like it wouldn't have been impossible from an engineering or material science standpoint, but it would have cost a bit more because USB-C requires devices connected with it to be capable of understanding a reversible or negatively signaled cable. The design requirements. The products we use are generally brought about by the requirements we have. USB was a reflection of that. It simplified so many things. And that was enough. Once people got used to that, they began refining the idea to make it smaller and, eventually, reversible. The point here is that our requirements for the connector changed over time. Initially, all we wanted was something simpler than what we had. And once we had that, it was a matter of refining the details. In addition to the reversibility of USB-C, USB-C itself can mean different things sorta. Some can only handle power. Some power and data. Some can't handle sufficient data. Some can be longer. Some can only be shorter. Some have specific protocols for a particular device, etc. It's why if you take a USB-C that comes with a phone factory cable, sometimes it can't charge a different phone even if you use that phone's charger. It's like asking why kids can't rap. The computers in the earlier stages didn't know how to communicate like that. And therefore there wasn't any cable to relay that speed of communication. USB-C is an evolution based on changing needs. Higher bandwidth, master client symmetry, more power. USB-A only offers 2.5 W IIRC standard. We learn. Literally, it was cost savings. I can't be bothered to look it up, but the inventor of the prior USB format said it was due to not wanting to pay for operability. Perhaps you are under the misapprehension that USB-C is a particularly new technology. It was invented almost a decade ago. The first USB-C phones came out 8 years ago and the first USB-C laptops 7 years ago. USB-C as a communications and power cable? No technical limit in materials science I am aware of that prevents it. But 20 years ago there was no application that needed the power and data speeds of USB-C. I'd need to do some maths to check, but it might be that you'd exceed the computational power of a 2000s PC trying to read in USB-C data at max bandwidth. It would have been an expensive cable of no real-world use. Communication standards like USB evolve alongside the users of that communication for reasons of economics more often than those of fundamental science. USB-C is just the physical connector, so the answer to that is simply it wasn't needed then. About the protocol itself, there's a lot of work to do about compatibility and signal stability. Price. They actually had this planned for previous versions, but it was too expensive. USB always was a very cheap way to do things. So why does it cost more? If you plug in something the other way too, you have to rewire everything by an additional switch. And that simply adds to cost. Not a lot, but USB always was the cheapest mass market connection. USB-C is almost 10 years old as it is. Before this we had the original connectors USB-A and USB-B. There's nothing overly complex about USB-C. It's just that when the original connectors were being developed in the 1990s, they weren't expecting items to unplug devices as often, so they weren't made reversible. What's so complex? Nothing. Why couldn't we have had this technology 20 years ago? $. There's nothing complex about the port design. It just wasn't necessary to have USB be reversible. In fact, it's so trivial that there are reversible USB-A cables. Apple in particular as a company didn't want to change because they wanted exclusivity on their parts and equipment. They changed only because the European courts forced them to comply. To add to the other answers, PC cards are one example of the extension of PCIe lanes with express cards lanes to external peripherals. This mirrors the function of Thunderbolt and USB 4 kind of. There are great answers here, but I just want to add that technology is generally iterative, which means that you don't aim to invent the ultimate device software, but rather to improve on the currently most advanced one. This reduces failures and keeps costs contained. While it might be better than the rectangular USB plugs and mini micro, sadly it still isn't as comfy as Lightning plug. Those just slide in without looking. ELI USB ports need several attempts or actually looking and guiding it in. Even see email. We didn't have as many words to use, so we could agree on things. And could only speak slowly. Just like people, we're learning to use more words and talk faster. 20 years ago we had FireWire, which did a lot of what USB-C does now. The controller chips were expensive and most computers couldn't take full advantage of the capabilities. Plus they charges licensing fees that scared away third parties.